So next we're going to be talking about progressions in the squat and working around someone's injury. So if you're working with someone that has like back pain or knee pain, how can you modify the exercise to make it more pain-free? So before we even talk about progression, I think that we should talk about regressions. So the simplest way to regress a squat would be to not even worry about the down part or the eccentric part. So just have a person sit down and just have them stand up for a box. Don't worry really how they're getting down to the box. And so that's real quick, just a regression. I'm gonna grab a weight and we're just gonna start out with doing what's called a goblet squat. So this is the first thing that I would do to load somebody up. So they master the body weight squat and start adding weight. So just hold the weight right there, close to the chest, just down into a squat. So I would keep doing that until they have the movement down and until they can increase weight on the goblet squat. So once they're like goblet squatting with like 60 pounds, maybe 70 pounds, we can start thinking about going over to actually doing this back squat with a bar on their back. So we'll go over here. So this is preference, but the first thing that I like to do is not just do a back squat, we'll start with a box squat. So we have the box here, it's a predetermined distance that the person has to go down to. And we wouldn't even necessarily start out with weight, we might just start out with the bar. So you can come over here. So some people do a narrow grip, some people go wide. There's this knurling right here that you can, I usually put like my middle finger right on there, and I'll go from there. So another thing, as you start to progress and get to heavier weight, it's important to make sure that the person that you're working with is taking a deep breath in, filling their stomach with air. That's going to help brace the spine. So if you kind of are squatting down with all the air out of you, that tends to happen. Deep breath in helps keep the spine a little bit straight. So toes can be pointed out about 10 degrees. For the box squat, again, you can be a little bit wider than you typically be. So like right here might be fine. I like a little bit outside shoulder width. So butt back, touch on the box, come up. So that's typically where I would go first before actually doing the back squat. Some people do a front squat as their next progression to the goblet squat. So what we do here, take my two fingers right where that rough part starts, let it rest right on the shoulder shelf. So keep the elbows up. You're not really grabbing the bar, okay? So this one, hips back, knees out. That's the front squat. So let's say they mastered the front squat or they mastered the box squat. We can move on to the back squat. So like I would just think about it. So basically, identical to the box squat. If anything, there's just no box. Again, if you notice with that, I'm flexing at my hips, flexing at my knees. My knees aren't coming too far forward. They're gonna go forward a little bit, but not so much. I'm not leaning so far forward either. So overall, pretty good form. So again, hips flex, knees flex. So let's talk about if you're working with somebody and let's say that their low back hurts when they squat. So why don't you come around this side? So we want to look for an alternative. A couple things that you can do here. You're doing the back squat and it hurts. Watch what happens to my low back when I put my hands back. I start to extend a little bit. So if a person has an extension-based low back problem, then I might want to front squat them so that they're not rounding so much or arching so much here. Let's say that they have a problem because they're leaning so far forward and they're flexing at their low back, so it's kind of like a flexion problem, or they don't have enough control and they're leaning forward so much and that's what's causing the pain. Let's look at a squat. I'm going to come right over there. Let's look at my torso angle without a heel lift, which is what we're going to do next, and we'll compare it to what this is right now. So notice how far forward I'm leaning. Get up on a heel lift. So you might be able to use like what's called Olympic shoes, so it just gives you a little bit of a heel lift. It's almost identical to this. If you don't want to spend $100 on Olympic shoes, then plates are fine. So notice how I'm a lot more upright. So this might work well for like sub-max weights. As you get into heavyweight, you still might be flexing forward. So if your person's doing like 60-70%, using the heel lift might, or actually there is a study that showed that they were staying a lot more upright. Okay, so back pain, try heel lift. Try changing what the lift is. So let's say your person has knee pain. Maybe that's not going to work for them. Maybe their knees hurt, like when they drift so far forward like this, so the knees are coming really far forward. So what you would do instead is really just kind of make that a hip dominant squat where the shins are staying fairly vertical. So it's a lot of hip flexion. That's going to be tough for someone that has never really done that before. So it's kind of a trade-off. If they have a back problem, you might want to keep them more upright, which the knees are coming really far forward on that. If they have a knee problem that's caused by the knees coming really far forward, you might have to sacrifice that by letting them lean their torso a little bit further forward. So you just kind of got to fiddle around with it, find which exercise doesn't hurt. So if we're actually doing like this kind of squat, the box squat might be perfect because it's got something back there. So if someone loses control, like right here, the box is already there, so it's just going to stop them. Other things that you can do. Let's say that I have a shoulder problem, so being back in this position doesn't feel good. Okay? So there's a couple alternatives you can do. You can still do the front squat, but what if someone has like a wrist injury and doing this just doesn't work? You can use, it's called a safety bar squat, so we'll go over there. So with this, the handles should be a little bit longer, but you wouldn't get it off the rack like that, it'd be a little bit higher. So now my hands are right in front of my body. No real demands are being placed on the shoulder. No real demands are being placed on the wrist. So I'm just squatting down. I like to bring my elbows kind of to the inside of my knees. Another alternative would be like a Caneberg bar where you're kind of just holding right here. So not as much stress on the shoulder again, not as much stress on the wrist as well. So those are kind of the injuries that you'll see. If there's a shoulder variation, we change the lift to some injury, we'll change the lift to something like that. If there's a low back injury, maybe we change like the foot placement, get them on like a heel lift, but their knees come forward a little bit further so they're staying more upright. If it's a knee problem, maybe we make it more of a hip dominant squat, where they're really pushing their butt back, working on using the glutes instead. So that's pretty much a wrap on how to progress the squat. So again, if we're regressing, we're just going from box to standing up. If we're progressing it, we front load it on the kettlebell. Then we move on to, at your discretion, a front squat or maybe a box squat. and then we go on to the back squat. If they've gotten to the back squat and they have some kind of injury, again, use one of those alternatives that we talked about. Now, it's not all inclusive. There's no rule that says that every client has to squat. There's plenty of alternatives, like a lunge would be a great exercise. You could do a rear leg elevated squat where your foot's up on a box. You could use a trap bar, which is like right there. That's great too. So you could use a sled back pedal. There's plenty of different ways to train these muscles that aren't even related to the back squat. So I think that's a wrap on that.